That very short clip that you just saw is an artistic rendering of a burning building collapsing. It portrays the destruction of Jerusalem and the first temple by the invading Babylonians in the year 587 before Christ. Virtually all Jews living in Jerusalem at that time were expelled. Beginning at sundown this evening, pious Jews commemorate what is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, Tisha B'Av. It is one of many remarkable historical coincidences that both the first and second temples in Jerusalem were destroyed on the same date, the 9th day of the month of Av in the Hebrew calendar, which is based on lunar cycles. On the eve of Tisha B'Av and until sundown the following day, observant Jews abstain from eating. It is a tangible way to remember and mourn, to mourn the destruction in 587 BCE of the first great temple of Judaism and the destruction of the second great temple of Judaism in the year 70 AD. The Jews who had been expelled following the destruction of the first temple under the Babylonians returned to rebuild their great temple in 516 BCE, and they remained in Jerusalem until the destruction of the second temple and the second expulsion, when the Romans conquered Jerusalem. For the ensuing close to 2,000 years, there was a constant, if small, Jewish population remaining in the Holy Land. A trickle of religious Jews made their way to Jerusalem and other holy places in Israel. At the end of the 19th century, the trickle became a flow, and in the following decades, a stronger and steadier flow, until, of course, the creation of the modern state of Israel in 1948. The Jewish exiles who had dispersed all over the world were ingathering, as we often say. Even with the mass murder of more than 6 million European and North African Jews in the Holocaust, anti-Semitism did not subside. Survivors of the horror in Europe were penned up in displaced persons camps for up to 4 years after the war. No one wanted them. Among them, my father, a teenage survivor of the war. He was stateless and had his life on hold, again, for 4 years, until he squeezed into Canada under a tight quota system in 1949. Many others had nowhere to go but pre-mandatory Palestine. Even there, they were blocked from entering by the British. Thousands of would-be Jewish immigrants were held in detention camps, surrounded by barbed wire on the island of Cyprus. With the creation of modern Israel, the Third Temple era impossibly began. Now, back to the present. Several days ago, I learned that a spectacular discovery had been made on a major archaeological site in Jerusalem very recently. Large, charred wooden beams used in the construction of a grand dwelling were uncovered. It dates back to the First Temple era and was very well preserved. We speak today with one of the lead archaeologists managing the excavation, Dr. Yiftach Shalev of the Israel Antiquities Authority. Upon hearing of this finding, I quickly found Dr. Shalev. We spoke yesterday on Tuesday, July 21st, so that I could turn this around quickly and publish in time for Tisha B'Av. I have never been terribly interested in archaeology, but this was fascinating and exciting for so many reasons. Trust me, stick with me, and you'll be richly rewarded. I find a way to integrate politics and history from the distant past to the present. This is about history, forensic and political analysis, and a real-time lesson in how we quite literally uncover the past. And it is also about the present, a time in which the world is obsessed with denying Jewish indigeneity, denying any historical connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And the parallels between the First and Second Temple eras, the horrific violence, they bear so many similarities to the savage attack by Hamas on October 7th. As do the horrors of the Hebron massacre in 1929. We have a special podcast dropping on that event in the coming weeks. Some nice light summer listening for you. This is the essence of Tisha B'Av, pausing to remember the arc of, how can I put it, Really bad stuff that has dogged the Jewish people forever. But now we bring you this 2-minute video from the site of the excavation showing Dr. Yiftach Shalev and his colleagues at work on site today in Jerusalem. There are some great video and artistic renderings of the city of Jerusalem more than 2,000 years ago, as well as the destruction of the Jewish city and temple. To see the past is also to see October 7th, and you bet we get into that too. This video has English subtitles. Here it is.
אנחנו נמצאים בחפירות חניון גבעתי בגן לאומי עיר דוד, חפירות משותפות באוניברסיטת תל אביב ורשות העתיקות. בימים האחרונים אנו חושפים קורות עץ שרופות מחורבן הבית הראשון. למזלנו הקורות האלה השתברו במצב מדהים. ארכיאולוגים אוהבים את האירועים שמשאירים לנו את החתימה הזאת, וברגע שאתה מוצא את זה, זה מרגש כל פעם מחדש. עד עכשיו לא היה בעיר דוד בכלל עץ עם טבעות. בימים האחרונים התחלנו לחשוף שכבת חורבן מתקופת בית ראשון. מה שהפתיע אותנו פה זה קורות שרופות, כנראה מהקומה העליונה או מהגג, שהשתמרו בצורה מדהימה. העץ שנמצא פה זה עץ שקמה שאותו כבר הכרנו מחלק אחר של המבנה שכבר חפרנו בעבר. וההפתעה הגדולה הייתה שהיה פה עוד עץ מחתני שיש לו המון טבעות והוא עוזר למחקר הפחמן 14.
שזה פשוט נורא נדיר למצוא עצים מתקופת הברזל בארץ, שיש להם כמות יפה של טבעות, ופה זה ממש קורות, עם הרבה טבעות, אז יש פה פוטנציאל ממש מחקרי.
נמצא מאוד נדיר של השתמרות כזו של עץ שמעידה לנו גם על רגע החורבן, על הרגע הקריטי של אותו אירוע, וגם בנוסף היתרון הגדול זה באמת של השתמרות העץ שתורם לנו למחקר. אחד הדברים פה שעזרו לי זה שכבה של טיח, של פלסטר, אני משערת שהוא נמס מהקירות בשריפה, והוא בעצם מגן על הממצאים על הרצפה. למצוא אותו ככה זה תמיד מרגש מחדש. אנחנו לפני תשעה באב, זה גורם לתחושה שאתה ממש ראית את הרגע של החורבן של ירושלים ברגע שזה יתרחש.
And now, the interview with Dr. Yiftach Shalev. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Tuesday, July 21st, just before 2 p.m. in the afternoon in Israel, Dr. Yiftach Shalev, the scientific advisor for the Israel Antiquities Authority Jerusalem District. Thank you so much for making time today to speak with the state of Tel Aviv and beyond.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Very excited about this conversation. It's outside my usual lane. I tend to stick to political, security, geopolitical issues, but I saw reports about your recent discovery, unearthing. I'm not sure what the right terminology is in archaeology, but I think that'll cover it, of a spectacularly important burned wooden beam.
Exactly, yeah.
What happened? What'd you find?
Okay, what happened is that this is what happened in archaeology sometimes. You dig in and then you find something amazing, and in this case, it's really is an amazing discovery. Basically, what we found is a room that contain burnt beams that are dated to the very, very last days of Jerusalem, the capital of the Judean kingdom, the destruction of that city by the Babylonians in 586 BC, which is an event that, of course, everyone knows from the Bible and other places. We also know it from several archaeological excavations in the past, but this is the first time that we actually see complete beams, a whole wood that we can date to that part, and we can sample and we can understand how massive this destruction was.
So I'm going to ask you to kind of help me and our listeners who may not be quite as well versed as you're giving us credit for being with respect to First Temple history, biblical history. But before we do that, what you were talking about, of course, was the wooden beam.
Right.
And it was, as I understand it, a massive wooden beam that's preserved enough for you to see that it's wood,
Mm-hmm.
to validate the time, to see that it had been burned. And this all went down when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple.
Right.
So fill in the blanks, please.
Okay.
What happened when the first temple was destroyed? What do we know historically? What did your beam, which I'm going to come to the field and see in a few months,
Should.
what did your
model.
beam show? And really interested in hearing you explain the science, because to me, I mean, I don't know anything about your field, and I'm sure many of our listeners don't as well, but to learn that you can find a wooden beam from more than 2,000 years ago intact and
Right.
be able to forensically ascertain, confirm what happened. I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And archaeology, modern archaeology, is much more than just digging in the dirt with tools and removing dirt to find walls or broken vessels.
Right.
We are using today chemistry and physics and other material to check what we found. Now, before we dive into this, let's again zoom out a little bit. We're talking about 7th and 6th century BC. Jerusalem is a large city. It's an urban center with many houses and water installation and fortification and palaces, and of course the temple that is standing on top of Mount Moriah. So try to imagine a really large city with all kind of infrastructure, and it is connected to trade centers that are related to what happened in the east, in Assyria at that time, and in the west to Greece and other places, Egypt. So this is a very strong and important city.
Let me ask you just before you go on,
Mhm.
do we have any idea of what the population of Jerusalem was at that time? And also, was the population living only within the walls of the city, or was it outside the walls, if you wouldn't mind?
Okay, so we're talking about quite a large city. For those of you who know more or less modern Jerusalem, so try to imagine something that is spreading from Jaffa Gate toward Mount Zion and then going down to where Siloam Pool is today in the village of Siloam and climbing back up to the temple. So it's quite a large city. Calculating the exact amount of people is always tricky, but we are talking about several thousand people who lived within the walls, and of course quite many small rural settlements in the vicinity of Jerusalem and in the valleys around it. It is walled. It is a fortified city. We got tracing, or parts of this wall were excavated in different places along the route, so we know quite well how the wall was built and more or less when it was built. We know that the city was first fortified completely as we know it today in the mid 8th century BC, probably after an earthquake that hit Jerusalem, and then they rebuilt the wall and fortified the city. Now, this whole beautiful city basically was completely or almost completely destroyed when the Babylonians are coming in and taking over the city. Although when you read the Bible, what the text tells us is that the Babylonians destroyed every large house. It doesn't say they burned down the city. It said they burnt large houses. And we will get to it later because this is basically what we are finding right now. Evidence for this destruction, as I mentioned before, were found in previous excavation in different places of Jerusalem.
Dr. Shalev is working with Professor Yuval Gadot of Tel Aviv University on this excavation. The site is known as the Givati parking lot. Not sure why, and I didn't go down that road. But it is in this place that they happened upon a trove of findings. The burned wooden beam that they found supported a very large house that was situated adjacent to the first temple. This was the holiest place for Jews at the time, and the site remains so to this day. After the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, Muslims built the Al-Aqsa Mosque, known as the Dome of the Rock, on top of the ruins of the First and Second Temples. The Muslims conquered Jerusalem in 638 of the Common Era. And beginning in 690, they began to build their Grand Mosque over a 20-year period. Excavation sites that are underneath the mosque, or near to, they are decried as constituting yet another nefarious Zionist plot to cause the collapse of Al-Aqsa. Untrue. What really drives their anger is that with each object found, the Jewish claim to the land of Israel is strengthened. But politics, okay, we'll leave that aside for now. All that remains of the second temple, which was built on the same site as the first temple, aside from what is being excavated, all that remains of the structure is the Western Wall. Many people believe that the wall is the holiest place for Jews, but that is a misnomer. It is, however, the closest that religious Jews were permitted to get to the site of the temples. They were only allowed to pray on the periphery of what Jews referred to as the Temple Mount, what Muslims refer to as Haram al-Sharif, Al-Aqsa, the wall, the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Now, back to Yiftach Shalev, who tells us about a recent discovery, a very large home adjacent to the first temple.
And what we are excavating in this place recently is a very large structure, which was built sometime in the 8th century, again, when Jerusalem became this large, important capital that we talked about, and continued to be in use until its destruction. One of the largest structures excavated so far in the city. We're talking about something which is 18 by 18 meters, more or less, with several rooms. At least in one part, it had 2 stores, one above the other. And we know that this is where the elite of Jerusalem used to live. We know that because of the small finds that were found within the structure.
So when you say you know that this was where there were large homes, that the large homes were destroyed in this disaster from small finds. And small finds, I'm assuming, are things like pots and pans and personal items, household items. Is that correct?
Also, but here in this structure, we know that it belonged to the elite because of the unique items, unique finds we found inside. For example, in one of the rooms, there were quite many jars, which is a common find, but analyzing the material that was inside these jars using an analysis that's called residue analysis. Basically, we are taking out molecule of material from within the clay fragment. We understood that all these jars that were in this room contain wine, but not just wine. This wine was spiced with vanilla. Vanilla is very expensive. This spice
Still is today. Vanilla is still expensive today, yes.
Right. And now it's been grown in Mexico, but back in the days, it's something that you had to go into places in Africa or India and pick it up. And this was brought to Jerusalem. Other finds that we have are ivory inlay. Pieces of decorated ivory, 5 by 5 centimeters. Each is decorated with flowers and other small items, images, which were basically decorating furniture or doors of this house. This is the first time ever that ivory were found in Jerusalem during that part. We have some ivories from other places in this period, especially from the Assyrian large cities, Namrud, Khorsabad, other places. But having this ivory with similar images here in Jerusalem is an indication that the elite of Jerusalem had all kind of connection with the Assyrian elite during that part. So again, it gives us an information about the rank of the people who lived here.
I want to just ask a few questions about what you said because it's fascinating. The wine.
The
wine. I like wine. What you're saying, which just blows my mind, is that from over 2,000 years ago, we have whatever they kept it in, clay jars, vessels, you tell me. And not only are the vessels preserved, but that there are still traces of wine, allowing you to analyze in such detail. It was wine, there was vanilla, like that's just mind-blowing. I mean, if I can make an imperfect analogy, it's somewhat like the tremendously compressed time frame over the last 30, 40, 50 years where analysis with respect to DNA and analyzing things has just, the trajectory has been like this. So people who were wrongly convicted of a crime 40 years ago are being released
Right.
because they can ascertain with, real specificity that, no, that's not that person. That's not their DNA. Wrong
Exactly.
person was convicted. But here we're going back 2,500 years. And it's
Right.
similar in an analogous way to the DNA analysis that we use. Tell us about the wine. What was it held in? What were the vessels made of? Because I'm thinking if it was glass, then the traces of substance might have been better preserved than if it was clay. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, actually, it's vice versa. Exactly. So
Oh,
we're
really?
so we're talking about clay jars, pottery,
Okay.
that were found crushed on the floor of that room. But this is what we call complete because we have all the pieces together, so we can restore the vessel.
Wow.
But what is important here, that we can take small samples from the inner face of that vessel. And when it stood there in that room and contained the wine, small molecules of wine got into the vessel itself. So
they permeated the clay because it's porous.
right, exactly. So now we're taking small samples from the clay itself, from the inner face. Smaller remains of these molecules are still visible today, using exactly the same way as you just mentioned, as tracing DNA. We can trace small molecules of material. And now the scientists, when they have this graph of different molecules, they can say, this is wine, this is olive oil, and this is amazing. I'm not sure it tastes very good, but this is amazing to find.
It's extraordinary. And I mean, just, to be a bit of a troublemaker, I got to ask you, is it Madagascar vanilla? Is it Indian vanilla? Any idea where it's from?
We are not there yet,
Okay.
but within a few years, I'm sure we'll get information about that as well.
Wild. So just very quickly, you said that you found other small objects to support the thesis that it was the wealthy, the elite who lived in these homes. What other finds were there?
Okay, so for example, we have quite many bulla. Bulla are small clay pieces that people stamp their seals into it to seal documents.
I don't know about you, but the word bula is a new one for me. Bulai, B-U-L-L-A-E, that's the plural. You can see a picture of a first temple era bula on the screen now. They were little pieces of clay, and then they were pressed to create an impression of a family name or some other symbol. As Yiftach just said, bulai, were used to seal documents in ancient times, kind of like a precursor to red wax seals, which are often stamped and still used in many parts of the world.
And many of these small bullas bear names of people who lived back in the day. Each person whose rank is high enough has his own private seal with his name on it, usually his name and the name of his father. At least on one of the bullas that we have, and we found more than 100, so probably whoever lived in this house has its own small archive or private archive of correspondence. And one of the bulla bear the name Netan Melech Eved HaMelech, Netan Melech, servant of the king. Now, servant of the king is not a servant as we understand today.
Yeah.
He is a high minister. He's the right hand of the king. And the name Natan Melech is a very strange name that we hardly know about. We never found any other seal or bulla or inscription with that name, but it do appear once in the Bible. And King Samuel, relating to the reform that Josiah is doing at the temple. So we can understand that whoever lived here was more or less in the same rank, that because he sent letters or signed documents of this Natan Melech. Going back to the beams, this is another good indication because we now know that these beams were sycamore tree. And sycamore is not a tree that is growing anywhere near Jerusalem. It's growing closer to the coast. So whoever built this house brought strong, large trees, or beams in this case, from another place to Jerusalem to build this house.
Wow. And that would have been in those days a long way. to
It
haul
is.
the
It's
beams.
a long way and it's expensive. So again, these are people who could afford themselves this type of
Right.
construction. And now this brings us to this amazing discovery, because usually you don't find organic material in Jerusalem. The climate here is too wet, and usually organic material just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened here is that the fire, the destruction of this house was so massive. We know that this house was burnt in something between 500 to 700 degrees Celsius. It's a very high temperature. And we know today that each and every room of this house was burned down. So try to imagine someone is getting into this house and is moving from room to room with a torch and burning down the beams that held the roof or the second
Right.
floor. So it's an intentional burning. And the house collapsed during that event. It didn't just stood there in ruins or partly ruined for ages. It just collapsed during that exact day. And again, what we found now recently is that in one of the rooms, probably the burning was so high that the room just collapsed. The walls, the stones of the wall collapsed down on these beams. The plaster melted from the walls, and it all basically produced a sealed context. And the beams that
Wow.
were inside this very, very hot pile of material were not exposed to air. Therefore, they preserved for 2,600 years, waiting for us to find it.
So, I mean, that's extraordinary. There's so many extraordinary things about what you just said. Not exposed to air. So you have this collapse of beams and then other material used in the construction of the home. And there weren't even pockets of air. I mean, that's hard to imagine that there were not even pockets of air.
Not enough for the organic material to completely disappear.
Okay, so there must have been some decomposition.
Some, yeah.
That's one. I have a few questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Because it's fascinating. The other thing, and I have to point this out because the parallel is very clear to those of us who live October 7th every day. You said that the sycamore beams had been deliberately set afire, as had the rest of the homes, which of course is what we witnessed on October 7th in
Right.
the communities along the Gaza border. You said that it was heated to approximately 500 to 700 degrees Celsius. We'll hold that thought because I want to know how you can ascertain that. Presumably that you do in conjunction with analysis of sycamore, with experts. I've never thought of sycamore as being a particularly strong, hard wood, but clearly it is.
It's much stronger than the local trees that grow here in Jerusalem, which are usually smaller and shorter.
So sycamore is clearly a very strong, hard wood, okay, if it can withstand those temperatures at all. But what we know about October 7th is that Hamas used accelerant to light the fires when they were burning down homes and people within them. And that those fires came close to, and in some cases exceeded, 1,000 degrees Celsius, which I can't even imagine there is such a thing outside of, Hades, hell. And we also know that everything was turned to ash. That in order to even identify the smallest particles of a human being who was caught in that inferno, it took months and months of the most advanced DNA analysis.
I was part of the archaeology.
You were part of that team?
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to talk on another occasion then. And as you were telling me, 500 to 700 degrees, of course, my mind went there. But what this suggests, as you said, is deliberate, systematic burning house to house.
That's what we understand, because again, if it was just an occasional fire, it would have been caught in one of the rooms, and then part of the room or part of the house was collapsed and the other was maybe left unburnt. But because the house is so big and we find evidence for burning in each and every of the rooms, this is how we interpret this evidence.
In the course of your excavation, have you discovered or uncovered any human remains?
No. Actually, even more than that, although we find quite many remains and items and finds within the house, this is not as many as you would expect that was just people caught inside or maybe didn't even had the time to flee. It looked like someone had enough time to clear part of this house. We
I
found
see.
but it's mostly along the walls, and we found large items, but we never found, or we found very few small ones. So it
Interesting.
seems that people had enough time to evacuate the house. And again, if you remember the history, we know that the Babylonians broke into Jerusalem, and then more or less a month passed between the breaking of the walls till the destruction of the temple. So there was enough time to people to try to escape, or maybe even the Babylonian army maybe even just told some people, move out, leave this house. We don't know. But so far we found no human remains.
Interesting. We also know historically that many people, Jewish people who lived in the land of Israel at that time, we call it the Babylonian exile, and it
Yeah.
marks the beginning of the, until 47 years ago, the flourishing community of Jews in Persia, what is today known as the Islamic Republic of Iran. Those were the beginnings of that community. Many people fled Jerusalem and other parts of Israel in the Babylonian exile and made their way east. I know we have to wrap because of time, and this is fascinating, and I could go much longer, but we'll have to continue on another day. What I want to do now is just ask you, I assume that these grand homes were very close to, adjacent to the temple, the grand temple. And that's kind of, reinforced by what you're telling us about the nature of the homes and the kinds of objects that were found in these ruins. I'd like you to just wrap up by explaining why this discovery of the beams is so significant and kind of gives us goosebumps, certainly gives me goosebumps, coming so closely to Tisha B'Av. So explain to us, we, the public, just learned about this discovery in the last few days.
Right.
When did you make this discovery? Because I assume there was some delay between you kind of finalizing, certifying, whatever you do in your world, to making it public. And why is it so significant in establishing the millennial presence of the Jewish people in the land of Israel? Take it away in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a big task. Okay, let's start with the first question. So first, in this case, the delay was relatively very short. We are digging or excavating this structure for quite a long time now, but we just moved into this new wing, the northern wing of the structure, where we found these beams, and we only started exposing them, I think, 3 or maybe 4 weeks ago. So it's relatively new. We just found it, and then the timing so close to Tisha B'Av is not something that we made up. It's not that we held it for a few months and decided, okay, let's go now. It fits, of course, but it's a recent discovery. The reason that this is such an amazing discovery is because it gives us a snapshot. When you look at this destruction, you can basically see yourself standing in Jerusalem in 10 of Av or 11 of Av and looking at this destruction. It's not just collapse of a house or something like that. You can actually see the destruction of the city and understand better, I think, the phrase that they burned every grand house. It's not just they burned down the city with, I don't know, rage and they don't care about anything. They intentionally burned the symbol of the regime. The temple, the palaces probably, and this massive house, when people looked at it, they knew that this is part of the kingdom of Jerusalem. And burning this down means that you symbolize to whoever stayed there that the king is dead,
Right.
the new king.
Extraordinary. Thank you so much, Yiftach
You're
Shalev,
welcome.
for being available for this fascinating discussion. And we're going to continue in the
Sure,
months
no
ahead.
problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
And as always, thanks to you, dear listeners and viewers, for being here. I will show on the screen now some still photos provided by the Israel Antiquities Authority. They are shots from the dig, at the Givati parking lot. At some point in the fall, I'll be going to the site with Dr. Shalev to see this work in progress. Cannot wait. If you go back and watch the video of the site again now, after having heard the stories, it will be much more meaningful, I think. I love this story, and I cannot wait to visit the site after I return to Israel in late September. In the coming weeks, I will be traveling. Actually, I'll be in North America for much of August and September. However, the podcasts and written pieces will continue. I have some superb content that was recorded over the past year and kept getting bumped for the latest and never-ending crises. I hope to publish several of those podcasts in August, as well as short updates that keep you current with the here and now. And of course, my recent nasty bout of sciatica that I mentioned in a previous episode did interfere with my productivity. I'll more than make it up to you. We are headed into election season in Israel. It is going to be a lively 3 months. Understatement of the century, perhaps. You can also look forward to a soft relaunch of the State of Tel Aviv website and some tweaks to the content, beginning in mid-September. If you have special requests or constructive feedback that you'd like to share, please do so. Whatever your thing, you can send me a note at vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. Don't be shy. In the meantime, hope you're enjoying your summer. Until next time, stay safe. Thanks for being here. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN@stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalim. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.